The nervous system is composed of the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, so we'll talk about the spinal cord here. And the peripheral nervous system are all the peripheral nerves. That would be the cranial nerves, which are directly attached to the brain, and the spinal nerves, which are directly attached to the spinal cord. As we start looking at nervous tissue, we need to see the neurons. The neurons are the conductive cells of the nervous tissue. They have three basic parts. There's the cell body. This is where the nucleus, the organelles, the cytoplasm is found. And there are two different sets of processes. The dendrites are the numerous processes that extend from the cell body and act as the receptive parts of the cell. The axon is a single process that leaves the cell body at the axon hillock. This will conduct the nerve impulse to the next cell. Nerves are structured a little bit like muscles. You have the individual axons, and these are going to be surrounded by a connective tissue known as the endoneurium. Then you have bundles of axons in fascicles, and each fascicle is going to be surrounded by a connective tissue known as the perineurium. All of the fascicles are bundled together to make one nerve, and it's surrounded by the connective tissue known as the epineurium. If we take medullated nerves and tease them apart, you can see the nodes of Ranvier. The Schwann cells that make up the medullary covering wrap around the axons, but they don't touch each other. So there are little areas where there are bare axons, and these are the nodes of Ranvier. The spinal cord, which is part of the central nervous system, extends from the medulla down to about L1 or L2. This has two major functions. It's the pathway to the brain, and it's a major reflex center. Like the brain, it is well protected, and like the brain, it has the same three protective coverings. It has the bone, or the vertebra. It has the cerebrospinal fluid because this flows down around the spinal cord as well as through the central canal, and it has the same three meninges. But there are some exceptions. The dura mater and the arachnoid mater extend all the way down to S2. That is, they extend beyond the spinal cord. This means that there is cerebrospinal fluid that goes down to S2. The dura mater is not fused to the bone, so there is a space between the bone and the dura mater. This is known as the epidural space. It's filled with fat and veins. When we do a lumbar puncture, we typically go in between L4 and L5. Since the meninges extend down to S2, we'll have cerebrospinal fluid there, but the spinal cord stops at about L2, so we're well below where the spinal cord is. This way we can get spinal fluid for analysis without damaging the spinal cord. The pia mater will extend all the way to the coccyx. It becomes a ligament known as the filum terminale. As we look at a cross-section of the spinal cord, we have cell bodies and dendrites centrally located. They make up this butterfly shape of gray matter. And then we have the white matter, the tracts, all around the outside. We have a tiny hole. This is the equivalent of the ventricles of the brain. This is the central canal, and we'll have cerebrospinal fluid in there. Looking at the picture, here is the central canal. This groove in the back is the dorsal or posterior sulcus, so it's a more shallow groove. Here in the front, we have the ventral or anterior fissure. Now, sometimes people get a little confused about dorsal, posterior, ventral, anterior. If you think about a D has a curved line and a P has a curved line, these go together. And a capital A is made with straight lines and a V is made with straight lines, so A and V go together. The gray matter is divided into horns, so we have the dorsal or posterior gray horn, and we have the anterior or ventral gray horn. Now in the thoracic region only, we have a lateral gray horn. The white matter is the dorsal white column in the back, sometimes called the posterior funiculus, and in the front it's the anterior funiculus or the ventral white column. And on the side we have the lateral funiculus or the lateral white column. This is going to be the myelinated axons that travel up and down the spinal cord carrying information to and from the brain. The spinal nerves are attached to the spinal cord, but they have two different attachments or roots. The dorsal or posterior root is going to carry sensory information as incoming information. The cell bodies for these sensory neurons are located in the dorsal or posterior root ganglion. This is a swelling that's easy to see, so this helps you orient yourself to the dorsal side of the spinal cord. Then we have the ventral or anterior root, and this is going to carry motor information away from the spinal cord. Now the two fuse just before they go through the intervertebral foramens into the spinal nerves, so the spinal nerves are mixed nerves. They have both sensory and motor information, but the sensory nerves split out Here are their cell bodies in the dorsal root ganglia, and sensory information comes into the dorsal horn. Motor information goes out the ventral horn through the ventral root, and that's the outgoing information. But the spinal nerve is a mixed nerve. It has fibers from both roots. As we look at the spinal cord, we see a couple of swellings. We have the cervical expansion and we have the lumbar expansion. Extra nerves come off here to go down the arms and the legs. There are 31 pair of spinal nerves. They're named for the area they come off of. So we have 8 cervical spinal nerves, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 come out of the sacrum, and 1 comes down off of the coccyx, so that's 1 coccygeal nerve. While there are only 7 cervical vertebrae, there are 8 cervical nerves. The first cervical nerve comes off over the first cervical vertebra, between the cervical vertebra and the occipital bone. The spinal cord tapers to a conus medullaris, so it doesn't come to an abrupt end but rather tapers off. There is a fibrous extension of the pia mater that helps anchor the cord to the coccyx. This is called the filum terminale. And then there are sawtoothed extensions of the pia mater that help attach the spinal cord to the vertebra at various points. These are known as the denticulate ligaments. The spinal cord needs to stay oriented exactly as it is. The spinal nerves come out through the intervertebral foramen. If the spinal cord were to twist around a little bit, those nerves would become pinched and that would be very painful. The spinal nerves to the arms and the legs further interweave, and we have what are called nerve plexuses. So here we see the conus medullaris, the tapering of the spinal cord, and we still have spinal nerves that come off of it that come down through the vertebral foramen so that they can come off at the lower lumbar vertebra, out of the sacrum, and over the coccyx. This, because it looks a little bit like a horse's tail, is called the cauda equina. And then here we see the filum terminale, which comes off the very tip of the spinal cord. This is that extension of the pia mater that will anchor the spinal cord to the coccyx. In this cadaver specimen, you can see the spinal cord tapering to the conus medullaris. Here are those spinal nerves coming down to come off the lower lumbar region, the sacrum. So here's your cauda equina. This would be the filum terminale right there. Looking at the nerve plexuses, we have a cervical plexus and a brachial plexus. This helps feed the arm. And then we have the lumbar and the sacral plexus. And these almost interweave with themselves. Sometimes they're so interweaved we call them the lumbosacral plexus. Coming out of the sacral plexus, we have the sciatic nerve. This is the longest nerve in your body. We've primarily been talking about the somatic nerves, the nerves that go to the conscious nervous system, but you do have your autonomic nerves. The autonomic nerves come out with the same roots that the somatic nerves come off of. Some of those nerves peel off and they go into ganglia that are along the side of the vertebra. This is called the sympathetic chain. The autonomic nerves go into the ganglia and they may travel either up or down the chain and come out and join a somatic nerve to travel to their effector. So this sympathetic chain ganglia is along the side of the vertebra and is part of the autonomic nervous system.